The movements of his mouth are completely side effects of the drugs that he was on for 20 years. Mr. Blount is quite rational. He understands what's going on. And if you're patient, he can carry on a very rational conversation with you.
Even when you remove the drug, it may still remain. It means you have caused a permanent disabling of the brain. In the late 50s, you get the first signs of it, people starting to worry about it. But it's not until the late 70s that psychiatrists start warning their patients about it. 20 years.
Le fabricant de la thorazine, SmithKline French, avait de bonnes raisons de camoufler les mauvaises nouvelles. Rien que la première année, il avait fait un bénéfice de 3000% sur son investissement initial. Tout en cachant au public et à la presse les graves effets secondaires des psychotropes, d'éminents médecins et psychiatres se sont réunis à Porto Rico pour établir un plan à long terme sur la propagation des psychotropes. Voici ce que le docteur Nathan Klein a écrit dans son rapport final après la conférence.
The present breadth of drug use may be almost trivial when we compare it to the possible number of chemical substances that will be available for the control of selective aspects of man's life in the year 2000.
Le Dr Klein était à la tête d'un mouvement qui visait à inonder le marché de nouveaux remèdes psychiatriques miracles, soutenus par une campagne publicitaire de centaines de millions de dollars. La psychiatrie était devenue une industrie de dealers. En 1970, l'Association américaine de psychiatrie était devenue financièrement si dépendante de l'industrie pharmaceutique que 30% de son budget annuel provenait d'annonces publicitaires pour des psychotropes dans ses revues officielles.
So we had money flowing to trade organizations, we had money flowing to the doctors, and to their journals. Well, we all know that that is going to influence how they think.
The majority of National Institute of Mental Health and National Institute of Health scientists are getting more money from drug companies on the side than their tax-based salary.
Avec tant d'argent à gagner, les psychiatres n'avaient besoin que d'une théorie scientifique pour justifier leurs gains. Leur solution ? Un rapport officiel déclarant que tous les troubles mentaux provenaient d'un soi-disant déséquilibre chimique du cerveau, d'où la nécessité de psychotropes.
This chemical imbalance is one of the greatest fallacies ever foisted upon patients and the public. There is no chemical test to show an imbalance related to any psychiatric disease, whether it's depression, anxiety, what have you.
The chemical imbalance is for the benefit of the psychiatrist. It has to be there so that psychiatrists can treat it.
Mais les théories frauduleuses du déséquilibre chimique ne pouvaient cacher l'évidence des effets terrifiants des psychotropes comme l'acathysie.
Akathisia is like an extreme inner nervous agitation. People describe it as wanting to crawl out of their own skins. And this happens with great frequency, and it is absolutely, totally well understood to be associated with suicide and violence and homicide.
En 1991, après des années de rapports sur les effets secondaires, sur les cas de violence, d'automutilation et de mort, des experts de la santé, des législateurs et le public ont finalement forcé la FDA à exiger une enquête.
I know with absolute certainty that if Charles had any idea of the side effects of Prozac, he would never have taken it.
I had two sons, David Lee, age 8, Billy 16, a wife 20 years old, gone. I'll tell you why. After being on Prozac for 21 days, my wife shot and killed both of these two boys right here. She turned the gun to herself and shot herself twice.
I took the 9mm automatic, sat down on the bed and put the gun to my head. And I blew a 4-inch hole out the back of my arm instead of my head. Thank God I was a lousy shot. Had someone looked further into Prozac, steps could have been taken to avoid it.
La commission d'enquête supposée être impartiale était formée par un groupe de psychiatres dont la majorité recevait un soutien financier des sociétés pharmaceutiques.
They basically couldn't find an expert, a doctor, a psychiatrist, at a leading medical school who basically in some way or another didn't have a consulting agreement, hadn't taken money from the pharmaceutical companies.
I do not find from the evidence today that there is credible evidence to support a conclusion that antidepressant drugs cause the emergence and or the intensification of suicidality and or other violent behaviors.
500 deaths, 33 murder cases, and over 20,000 adverse side effects. Would you like to tell me why this drug is still on the market?
Is there an alliance, an unholy alliance between the psychiatric community, the pharmaceutical industry, and the FDA? And the answer is yes.
Cette alliance immorale est apparue au grand jour en 1997, lorsque les sociétés pharmaceutiques ont obtenu de la FDA le droit de faire leur publicité auprès du public. Avec les psychiatres vantant le caractère médical des psychotropes, leurs ventes ont augmenté de plus de 2,5 fois en moins de 3 ans. Quand le nombre des victimes de violences et de suicides atteignit un niveau effrayant, l'indignation du public finit par contraindre la FDA à émettre des mises en garde à propos des antidépresseurs. Mais entre-temps, 13 ans s'étaient écoulés, avec des milliards de dollars empochés et d'autres drogues miracles mises sur le marché. Aujourd'hui, plus de 8% de la population mondiale a pris des psychotropes, cautionnés par une pseudo-science et approuvés par des experts corrompus, rapportant par an près de 27 milliards de dollars. En trouvant le moyen de diagnostiquer des troubles chez tous afin de les droguer, les psychiatres poursuivaient leurs attaques contre nos libertés les plus fondamentales. Les psychiatres réclament le droit absolu de décider de ce qui convient le mieux aux soi-disant malades mentaux. Après tout, les malades mentaux sont fous et incapables de choisir leur propre traitement. Pour imposer leur pouvoir sur les autres et garantir que le taux d'occupation de leurs établissements est rentable, les psychiatres utilisent l'internement d'office.
When you go to a real doctor, say a family doctor or a cardiologist, a patient always has the right to refuse treatment. So there is no such thing as involuntary treatment when it comes to clinical medicine as practiced by real doctors. Psychiatrists, of course, believe that people can be treated against their will.
En 1956, le psychiatre Winfred Overholzer a présenté au Congrès américain un projet proposant d'amener l'internement d'office à un tout autre niveau. Ce projet, acheter un demi-million d'hectares de terres sauvages en Alaska, construire un immense hôpital psychiatrique et changer les lois sur l'internement de sorte que n'importe qui pourrait y être envoyé sur un signe de tête d'un psychiatre. Le projet de loi a été approuvé par la Chambre des représentants. Mais lorsque le public a eu vent de ce projet, qu'il a appelé « Sibérie des États-Unis », il était furieux. Ce projet a aussitôt été attaqué par le Sénat. Mais si l'échec du projet de loi Sibérie avait mis un frein au plan de grande envergure, l'internement d'office restait toujours la méthode la plus efficace et la plus rentable pour remplir les établissements psychiatriques.
Again, the person has committed no crime and has no trial and is sent directly to a mental hospital, which is really a prison.
How many people go to an insane asylum and say, please lock me up? Doctors don't lock up anybody. Psychiatrists lock you up.
Même les enfants peuvent être séparés de leurs parents, avec peu de chances de recours.
They just invaded our home. They came in with officers. Our kids were scared. You know, they come in with pieces of paper and say, you're giving us your kids. And it's like, you know, how can they just come in and do that?
She said, you could be arrested for medical neglect. And I said, but how is that when, you know, this is my child? And I see that he doesn't need that much medication. Why would you threaten me with something like that?
At 10 p.m., 2 policemen and 2 social workers came to my house and took all 4 of my kids away.
Une fois internés dans les hôpitaux psychiatriques, les patients sont drogués et mis sous contention.
The more a person objects, the more this objection is construed as symptom of a mental illness.
At which point the person would be locked up in restraints. There would be the ankle, the knee, the waist, the head, the wrist, and the shoulder restraints. And if when that process was happening, if there was almost any resistance at all, the person then would be medicated to a point where they would almost be knocked out.
We had one case where they actually took a patient in a seclusion room and beat him up. And then they lied about it to the services that investigated. So it's a pretty wide range of abuse issues that we've encountered.
Le personnel psychiatrique incite les patients à être violents de façon à pouvoir facturer aux compagnies d'assurance jusqu'à 1 600 $ par jour pour chaque patient sous contention.
A patient would resist diagnosis, resist treatment, and also want to leave treatment while they were at the hospital. And invariably, every time, that person's situation would be exacerbated until they were put in constraints and medicated, at which point they would